And there we go. Right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is our introduction to the iPhone and the iPad. Those wonderful devices which seem to have been around forever, but have only been around, less than 20 years, and we'll talk about that. Let's see if we can get this going now. There we go. Okay. So just a quick introduction for those who don't know me. I'm Jeff Calvariski. Going to try and help you get as much out of your iPhone or iPad as you can, just to get to know it, what it can do, and basically use it productively and have fun with it. So I've been doing this for a while, and it's my pleasure to, share the little bit of knowledge that I've got with you all. So first piece of business is, here's my email address, and I'm not putting it there in order to boast or anything. That's useful to you. For those who don't know me and haven't seen it, write this down. That's Jeff _ not the dash, but the _ Calvariski @earthlink.net. I'm sorry, it's a very long email, but I've had it for so many years, I can't change it now. You will need that email address after the session. Send me an email and just say, one-line email to send you the slides for the iPhone, iPad class. And I will respond, and all of the slides, these screens that you're seeing here, I will send you the exact slides so you can, in future sessions, you can follow, and or you can print them out and use them for notes or whatever you like. So you need that address, and I will respond to you usually within 24 hours, usually much less than that. Okay. So we're going to learn a whole lot of stuff about the iPad. I'm not going to bother with it. I'm going to move forward now. The first thing I'm going to ask the question, a kind of obvious question, is, what is the iPhone and the iPad? And the one thing that we see all the time, if we do anything with Apple, is you'll see the strange symbol iOS, small I, capital OS, which is kind of an odd way to write words. We normally have the capital letter at the beginning and the small letters afterwards. Here it's back to front. So basically, every mobile device, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet or a computer, laptop for that matter, needs certain basic software to make it work. It's kind of like the engine of the car or the soul in the human body. Without a soul, all you got is a pile of meat. Put a soul into the body and you got a human being. Without an engine, a car can only go downhill, and that's about it, right? The engine of the car, which mostly you don't see, you don't know about, you don't care about, that's what makes the car worthwhile to you. On a computer, on your iPhone or your iPad, this special software is called the operating system, or shortened to OS. And that's a very old term. It dates back to, even before I started my career, when the dinosaurs ruled the earth. It was an IBM term, and it was the program that ran the big mainframe computers, was called the operating system. And somehow or other, that term has lasted way into the 21st century, so we still call it the OS. So iOS is Apple's operating system. They weren't very original in the name. Everything with Apple has got the little I. I don't know what the I stands for. You would think they had a little A, but anyway, little I is everything's Apple, iPad, iPhone, and so on, iPod, all with an I. And so iOS is Apple's operating system. And that's the program that's running all the time. When you turn on your phone, you'll notice if your phone's been off and you turn it on, it takes a few seconds before you can do anything. It just doesn't even respond to you for 10 seconds or something. And what it's doing is it's starting up the operating system. It's kind of organizing itself and getting out of bed. And that's the operating system, which you don't know anything about it, but it's running in the background. And what it does is, it is essentially, again, to use the same word I used above, it's the soul of the phone. It's that program that gives your device its unique, what they call look and feel. So when you look at an Apple or an iPhone or an iPad, right away it's Apple. They've got a way of doing things. They've got certain pictures and icons and the layout and so on. That's what the operating system does for you. Also, it ensures that things are as much the same as possible. So when I started my career in early days, even of, when mainframes still, and then when PCs came out, they were really complicated. Every program was different. Every program they wrote, the word processor wasn't the same as a spreadsheet, wasn't the same as the operating system. Every company that provided you with software did it their own way. which is a bit chaotic. You know, imagine if every car was different. You know, some cars have got the gear lever on the right, and some have got them on the left, and some have got them on the trunk, and some the manual is in German, and some of the manuals in Chinese. It would be kind of difficult. You know, cars would not be very useful like that. You want all cars to be the same. I want to be able to get into a Ford or a BMW or a Ferrari, and the gears are the same, everything works the same. That's what the operating system does. It makes sure that whoever writes software, whether it's Apple or somebody else, that it has to have the same look and feel. And so, you know, as I said, in the early days when it was complicated, that was great for geeks like me, because people like you who wanted to get a job of work done needed us to help them, because it was so hard to do. It was really like, you know, all the manuals are written in Chinese, and I'm the only guy in the company who knows Chinese. So every time you look in the manual, you got to call me to translate. Those days, fortunately, are gone, and it's now much, much, much simpler. But the problem with that is that as things have got simpler, the Apple and all the other guys have felt less and less need to provide manuals, you know, instruction manuals of how this thing works. So basically, you know, in the early days, when you got a phone, you know, it had a manual. I remember my first phone, the manual was bigger than the phone. It was yay thick, and it told you how to do everything. Now it's so obvious, quote unquote, that you don't really get any manuals or any instruction. So most people sort of learn how to turn on the phone or turn on the iPad, and they don't get a lot further than that because it's so hard to find out how to do stuff. But the good news is what we're going to do in this course is not learn every possible thing. There's millions of things that your device can do. We're going to learn sort of generally how it works, what the concepts are. And then you'll find with a little practice and a little experimentation, you can pretty much do anything, right? You'll learn when you get a new program how it works, because it pretty much works the same as all the other programs. And Apple's very, very strong on that. They don't allow any software developers on their devices to, you know, be rogue and do things differently. You've got to do it our way. And this is an occasion when a dictatorship is a good thing, right? They've got better security because of that. So people can't do stupid things with their software, which would allow you to get hacked. The software has to meet rigorous standards. And that's what we're going to sort of talk about. What are those standards? And so when you know how to use iOS, you can use any iPhone, any iPad, doesn't matter what version it is. You can go back to, you know, version 1 iPhone or the latest iPhone, and it doesn't matter. They're all going to be pretty much the same. What's happening as the generations go on is that Apple's providing us with more features, more things, more stuff that it can do, some of which may even be useful. You know, they're putting in a lot of stuff which is junk that just, you know, complicates it. So first thing to remember is that an iPhone or an iPad, especially an iPhone, which you just think of as a phone, is not really a phone at all. It's a very, very powerful computer, right? It just happens to fit in your purse or your pocket, right? But literally, it's more powerful than the mainframe computers that I used in the 1970s and 80s, which took up literally an entire room and cost millions of dollars. You know, the only ones who could have a computer back in those days were pretty substantial corporations, right? Because it cost millions of dollars, it took up a whole room, and it needed 4 people to run it. And basically, it couldn't do a fraction of what your computer can do today. You know, it didn't have the internet. It was, you know, it was the purview of the techies, of the programmers and the operators and so on. And the users just took what they could get, right? So it took a long, long time for that complexity to become the simplicity of a little device that fits in your hand, or, you know, is the size of an iPad like this, and can do, you know, incredible things that we couldn't even consider in the old days. I mean, those mainframe computers, you know, they didn't even have screens. Everything had to be printed out and so on. Now you've got the screen, everything's instantaneous. It was certainly not possible in those days to contact anybody else in the world. I mean, the very idea would have been crazy, right? And there were probably only a few hundred computers in the world. Now, of course, there are, you know, billions of them. And to some extent, that really is due to Steve Jobs and Apple. That, you know, it's changed everything. So, you know, this is, imagine that in comparison, that's like you could buy a car today that can do 500 miles an hour, only needs gas once a month, and it drives itself all for $500, because that's what it is. You know, a computer that used to cost millions of dollars now costs, even at Apple's expensive prices, say $1,000, and you know, it can do 1,000,000 times more than what those computers cost, which cost millions of dollars. So the iPhone came out in 2007, so it's only 13 years old, which is interesting. You know, we seem to think of it as it's always been around, but that was the first smartphone, the phone without a keypad. So everybody probably remembers the old flip phones that had a little keypad and a little tiny dinky screen on it. And the way you input data, remember you used the number pad, and the A had 3 letters on it and the B had 3 letters, and you had to press the B 3 times to get the B, and so on. All that stuff went away when the iPhone came out, with this brilliant concept that the screen was where all the action was going to happen. And that's what we're going to talk about in a moment. The iPad, which came out only 10 years ago, was essentially designed to be an iPhone with a bigger screen. It was a very clever idea. And one of the divisions they made between the iPhone and the iPad was that the iPad was not a phone. It was not designed to be a phone, because I think the designers thought quite logically, you know, walking around with this on my shoulder, you know, with an iPhone on your shoulder, would be kind of like the guys in the 70s with a big boombox on their shoulder. It didn't make any sense. So it initially was not a phone. You can now get options on the iPad for an extra $100 or something. Obviously, ka-ching, ka-ching. Apple always wants to make a profit, and you can use it for making calls. Of course, you wouldn't hold it on next to your ear. You would use an earpiece. But even more clever, as we'll talk about in a future session, the software guys found, you know, the people who write programs took that as a challenge, and they actually did an end run. And you, of course, today can make calls on an iPad and on an iPhone without using the telephone network at all. They've found a way around it completely using the internet, and we'll talk about that too. So the question people always ask me, we got a phone, you got a tablet, you got a laptop, you know, what the heck's the difference? It's very confusing. So, you know, here in the right, top right-hand corner, this is an iPhone. Next to it is an iPad. And down at the bottom is an Apple Mac, right? And, you know, pretty much you can see they look very, very similar when you look at what's on the screen. You know, it's got all these little pictures. This one's got little pictures, and you can see the list of icons on the bottom of the screen of the iPad, of the iMac, right? So they all start with iPhone, iPad, iMac. And I say today, you know, at one time there was a significant difference. Today it's good to say that it's what I call the Starbucks difference. You know, what's the difference between a small, medium, or a large, or whatever they call them, venti or whatever, you know, at Starbucks? Well, you know, it's exactly the same coffee. It's just in a bigger mug. You know, you're either going to get it a small one or you're going to get a large one, but they taste the same, and the only difference is you get more of it, and so it costs a little more. So really, these are identical devices. In fact, today it's moving to, they actually have almost the same processors in them. And the phone has moved so fast that actually the processor in the phone and in the iPad is now more powerful than the processor, the computer processor that's inside the iMac, which is the big expensive computer. And in fact, there'll be generations of the iMac coming out that now no longer use special laptop chips, but will use the same chip as in your phone. So essentially the iMac's going to become, you know, the big screen iPhone, which is kind of interesting. So really I say it doesn't make any difference. And so you choose the one that best suits you and your wallet, how much you want to spend. Although there was a time, of course, when the iPhone, you know, cost X, the iPad cost, you know, a little more, 2X maybe, and the Mac was really expensive and cost 5X. But now, unfortunately, they've managed to push up the prices of the phone. So the phone and the iPad are now moving well up, and they're all in the, you know, in the same high territory of, you know, $1,000 or something like that, which is, you know, strikes me as kind of crazy, but that's the way it is. So say you choose what you want. You know, the iPhone is obviously great for making calls. Naturally, it's a phone, but, you know, it's good for texting as well, a new thing that came out, which we'll talk about, for playing games and so forth. The iPad is, you know, it's got a much bigger and clearer screen, so it's better for reading books, watching movies, that kind of stuff, right? Although you can certainly watch movies on the iPhone. And I often see guys, especially on the plane when we used to be flying a lot, be watching football games on their phone. It's a bit small for me, for my eyes. I don't know about you guys, but you pays your money and you takes your choice, as they say, whichever one you want. And then the laptop is still really for productive work, for typing spreadsheets, writing document. You could write the great American novel, which I'm sure all of us have been meaning to write about our lives, or your autobiography. You could write it on a phone, but it would be kind of hard to do because it's small. But just to show you that it really is possible, in many countries in the world where people are not as fortunate as we are in the United States, in third world countries, people use their phones, as significant parts of their lives. And there's a lot of software development that's done in places like Africa and India on phones, because that's all they got. Nobody can afford an iPad or a Mac. So they're actually developing significant software, making movies. That's the latest thing that's been happening now. There are a whole bunch of movies that have been made using iPhones, using the camera on the iPhone, which strikes me as beyond amazing. But in the old days, this was all done with laptops. It really means that the three of them are pretty much the same now. Now, the most important thing is this last bullet point here. They can all be synchronized with the same data. And that is quite amazing, right? So I can do something on my iPhone, go to my iPad and continue from where I left off, and then go to my Mac and continue from there in any combination. And we'll talk about how that's possible. That's an amazing thing if you think about it. I can literally start reading a book on my iPad, and then I will come to my laptop computer and go to the same application, the same program to read books, and it will open up at exactly the book that I was reading at exactly the page that I left off. To open the same book at page 37, because that's where I left off on the other one. And that's pretty amazing too. So it also means that your data now is shared among your devices. And so we have less chance than we had in the old days that you might lose all your data. There was a time when all your data was on your laptop, and if your laptop broke, because it's a machine, it can die, or it could get stolen, or the disk drive could fail or something like that. All your data could be gone. But now, the data is essentially shared, and it's, I won't say impossible, but pretty unlikely you'll ever lose your data. So let's look at them. What are they? They're similar devices, essentially with the same operating system. Now that's amazing, that although these are essentially internally totally different devices, they have exactly the same operating system. The Mac operating system, which is much older, so the Mac computer has been around much longer than the iPhone, that has its own operating system. But to the user, it looks very, very much like iOS. They've made them look the same. So again, I don't care what kind of engines in the front of my car, as long as I can drive it. Doesn't matter whether it's a $400,000 Ferrari or a $20,000 Ford. They drive exactly the same. The engine is what makes the difference, but I don't really care. I don't have to relearn how to drive a BMW or a General Motors car, as opposed to a Ford or a Tesla, right? So let's talk. Can everybody please mute their phones, mute their devices, because we're getting backyard noise. Thank you. So we'll just talk quickly about this. This is probably pretty simple. Everybody knows it, but I'm just going to go over it quickly. How do you power your device? Well, obviously, now we're in an era where we're all tied to one thing. Well, these days I guess we're tied to our houses. We can't go out, but really we're tied to one thing, and that's the power supply, right? The two-pin electric outlet in the wall, is what controls us today, because we don't want our phone to run out of electrical power, and we don't want our iPad or our laptop to run out of power. So we're always faced with this issue. And certainly when we were still flying a lot, you would see people almost fighting each other to get to the electric sockets at the airport. Before you leave on your 2 or 3 or 4 hour flight, but if you don't have enough, you only have 10% left on your phone, then it's going to die in flight, and you don't want that to happen. So people would all be sitting on the floor with their phones plugged in. So basically, the way Apple does it is they have a connector that's called a lightning connector. Why lightning? I don't know. It's no faster than anybody else's connector, but it is this cable that we're all used to. And I'll just tell you a little bit about it. It sounds, kind of boring. It's a cable, but it actually has some interesting components. On the one end here, we have this big square connector, the big one on the left, and that's called a USB, Universal Service Bus. Doesn't matter what it means. It's just that, unlike in the earlier days of computers where every device had a different connector, a printer had one kind of connector and a phone had a different connector and so on. This is now the universal connector. So all devices pretty much today use the standard kind of rectangular cable or connector here called a USB. On the other end, on the small end, Apple has their own lightning connector. And it's a funny little thing. It's not, you can see it's not the same as the USB. In fact, the USB has to go in the right way. If you put it only goes in one way into the socket. If you put it in the wrong way, it won't fit. You have to have it face up, so to speak. The other end doesn't really care. It's the same on both sides, which doesn't really matter to anybody. But the fact is, yeah, Apple went their own way. And so today, the only place you technically can get a power cable is from Apple. And everything with Apple costs twice as much. So these lightning connector cables cost about $30. And a regular cable, of which I have dozens. Let's see if I've got one lying around here. Yes, here we go. So I don't know if you can you see this? Can you guys see this? I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it? Hello? Okay, well, I'm going to take that as a no.
Yes.
Yes.
You can. Okay, so you can see the two ends of the USB. There's a big USB, looks like that on the screen there, big rectangular one, and then a small one. And the small one's just smaller because the phone or the iPad is smaller and there's not as much real estate, but they're exactly the same. With Apple, the one on the other end is particularly for Apple. And so I could say these things cost about $30. These cables here cost, $5, $7, $10 kind of thing, because it's standard, so everybody makes them, whereas these one only Apple makes them. You can now get Apple connectors from other people, but far fewer than you can with other devices like Windows or Android. And in general, they also cost more. So that's the only real difference, right? So we plug that end in, the Apple end, the lightning connector goes into your device. This end here goes usually into the power adapter. So this is a regular 2-pin plug. And on the side, which we can see in this picture, it's got a slot that this thing fits into. It only goes in one way, as I said, and then you plug that into the wall. You put the lightning end into your phone, and it connects up and charges it up. Just some thoughts about that right now. Your phone or your iPad will charge until it gets to 100%, until it's full, and then it'll stop charging. So you never have to worry. People have said to me, am I overcharging it? And is it going to cause problems and so forth? And in the early days, there were some issues with that, but not anymore. So the habit that I have is I have a cable like this right next to my bed. And at night before I get into bed, I plug in my phone or my iPad, and in the morning it's 100% charged. And in general, Apple's batteries are very good. The phone will often last 1 or 2 days, and the iPad can last 2 weeks, depending how much you use it, obviously. If you're watching a lot of movies, it will only last a couple of days. If you're just doing emails and, going to CNN.com or Amazon.com on the web, it can last, several weeks. And if you're not using it, if it's just in kind of quiet mode, it can keep its charge for 6 weeks. This is really pretty good. So, don't worry about overcharging. And a good habit is just charge it overnight, and then it's always powered up during the day. By the way, if there are any questions for anybody, this isn't a lecture. I'm more than happy to answer them at any time. If there's something that I didn't state clearly, which is quite possible, or that you have some questions on, you didn't understand, or you want to take it further, just speak up and I'll be happy to answer your question. Okay, so when we look at our device, our iPhone or our iPad, we get the home screen, right? This is the standard screen that when you power it up, this is how it starts, right? And it's got a bunch of these funny pictures on, and it's got a row of little pictures at the bottom with a slightly different colored background. Oops. And as I said, this is where the action happens. So we have all these little pictures, they're called icons. Not sure why they call them icons, because an icon is actually a statue in the Catholic Church, you know, a statue of Jesus and Mary and so on are called icons. How they got that name, I don't know. But they're also called apps, which I think is a better name, which stands for applications, the programs that do something. So these are your apps or your icons, whichever you want. Now, the brilliant idea that Steve Jobs and Apple had in the early days is, well, if we don't have a keyboard, how do we make this thing work? Well, you know, in the days before, you know, this clever idea came out, we had to use a keyboard to do stuff, right? Even on a computer, you had to know the instructions. The computer needed instructions, and you had to know how to get your word processor to run, or your Excel spreadsheet, or your email. And if you didn't know the exact instruction to the letter, if you had one letter wrong, it just would, you know, the computers were dumb. They would say, I don't know what you're talking about, right? And so that's why it's kind of hard to get things done. This idea, and so it was all characters, all letters. You had to type A, B, C, D. And if you typed A, B, D, C, then it didn't work, right? Or you typed A, B, C, E, it didn't work because the computer said, I don't understand A, B, C, E. Oh, I know what A, B, C, D means, right? It was that stupid. It was like essentially dealing with a 3-year-old, right? You had to use the exact terminology, right, that the 3-year-old understand. This idea was really clever, is to come up with little pictures, and then if you touch the picture, it does one thing. So instead of having very complicated programs on your iPhone or your iPad that do dozens and dozens of things, as used to be in the old days, you now have very simple programs that do one thing. So this little program at the top left here, this little icon, it says mail. And these days, of course, mail means email, and that's all it does. So if you click on that, you are not going to see the time. You're going to get your email. But over here is an icon that looks like a clock, and it says clock. And if you click on that, you're going to see the time, and you can set alarms and so forth, right? So it's very easy to remember because the pictures are almost self-evident, and they've got a little description underneath as well. So the one that says calendar, well, I can see the date on it. It says it's the 16th, which it isn't today, but that doesn't matter. For the purposes of this exercise, when I click on that, I'm going to see my calendar, right? There's one here that looks like a camera. If I click on that, that's going to turn on the camera. What's really interesting, I always find, is that if you look at all of these icons, they use the old symbol, if you know what I mean. So the email has got a letter or an envelope. I don't know about you, but I can't remember when I last sealed an envelope and put it in the US mail. The camera is one of those old, you know, single lens cameras. I used to have one hung around my neck. It weighed about 12 pounds and it took, you know, okay photos. Today I got a camera built into the phone, which we're going to talk about. That's 10 times more powerful than that, but still they use the old icon, the clock too. Notice the old clock with hands, you know. Kids today, I don't even think can tell time with clocks with hands anymore. And I'm sure in the next generation, they're going to say, what is that icon? I know it says clock, but what is that round thing with 2 lines on it and some numbers going around? I think that's kind of what's going to happen in the next generation. So I don't know if they're going to then change the icons or what, but right now it's still easy for us who know that, you know, clearly something with an envelope means mail, and something with one of these old cameras with a lens in the front means a camera, and we all know what a clock is and so forth. Right. So all you have to do is touch it and it does something, right? So there's the camera, and if I press this icon, it does what we expect from a camera, which is take photos. Will I get the date and the time and my email on that app? No, that's not how it works, right? In the old days it was. You had one big app and we did everything. It had the email, it had the calendar, it had the clock, all built in, and it was all very complicated. Now we split it up into lots of simple little things. And once you've used your icon once, you really know how to use it very well. You know, it's always going to be exactly the same. So some basic features of it, okay? The power on off button, right? So the power button on your phone is usually in the lower center. It's usually still a physical button, right? or it's a power button on the side. The actual on/off button, the real power button, is on the side, so usually on the right. And when you hold that down, it will turn the device on or off. If the device is on, it'll turn it off. If it's off, it'll turn it on. That's a good thing to do. You know, people say to me, well, should I turn off my phone, you know, to save battery or be more secure at night or whatever? The answer is no. It's hardly worth ever turning off your phone. In fact, there's more damage potentially to the device by turning it on and off than by leaving it running. Because, you know, like they say with an airplane, when you fly in a plane, the dangerous times is takeoff and landing. The rest of it is, you know, there's a computer flying it, there's no big deal. You're at 30,000 feet. Same here with the phone, that starting it and stopping it is what puts the stress onto the electronics. And although, you know, that's not a great amount of stress, you've got more chance that it'll malfunction if you keep turning it on and off than if you just leave it running. So I suggest just leave it running. Also on the side of both an iPad and an iPhone, you have a volume button, right? There are two kinds of volume buttons, and it seems to depend on the model. Some have got two buttons. One is plus and one is minus, making the sound louder or softer. And most of them today are a single button. If you press it one way, it makes it louder, and if you press it the other way at the other end, it makes it softer. It's kind of like a rocker, right? Now, until now, and this has changed in the last 6 months or so, the phones all had what is called an earphone jack, and that is at the bottom would be a little round hole on the device into which an earphone could be fitted. So, so if you've got standard earphones like this, then basically the earphone would plug in and you could listen to music or have a phone conversation without anybody knowing that you were, you know, what you were saying, or disturbing your, you know, your significant other when they're trying to sleep and you're listening to a movie or something. Now, that's interesting, is that in the latest go around, Apple have taken away the earphone jack. I guess I need to change this. Now, the question you say is, why did they do that, right? You know, these earphones cost almost nothing. You know, a good pair like this is probably $10, $15. You know, really top of the line would be $30 kind of thing, but certainly get them for 10. Why would they do that? You know, Apple says we're doing it because we can, because they totally control their environment. On the Android phones, which is supplied by Google, they don't have control over the hardware because there are dozens of manufacturers who make the phones, which is why they're cheaper. Apple has total control. So they decided to take away the jack and replace simple earpieces like this one that I'm holding up with the clever little white ones, the iPods that hang out of your ear. So if you see people walking in the street with what look like white earrings, those are the new phone, the earphones, and they connect to your phone essentially by wireless, right? By what's called Bluetooth. I'll talk about that later. But it's kind of like an short internet connection from your ear to the phone. So you say, well, that's great. Now I don't have to carry these cables around on that, which is true. But of course, the cables, as I said, cost, you know, $10, $15, $20. And you got one free anyway when you bought the phone. So as long as you didn't use it, you didn't lose it, it wasn't going to cost you anything. These new AirPods cost $160. So Apple have managed to get the price up 5 times. Yes, the sound is definitely better, no question about it. But my concern with these things is, you know, I'm going to be wearing it in the street and I'm going to lose it for sure. One's going to fall out and then you've got to buy a new set. So, you know, that's called progress. The sound is better, but not significantly so than the old earphones, but the price is at least 5 times as much. Then another brilliant idea that Apple had, and I've got to give them the kudos on this, was to put a camera on the phone. And I remember when the iPhone came out, my thought was, you know, they said it had a camera. What do I need a camera on my phone for? You know, that's like having a washing machine in my car. You know, it didn't seem to make a lot of sense. Well, not only did they put in one camera, but they had the even more brilliant idea of having 2 cameras, right? One in the front and one in the back. And if you look at your phone, you'll see the clear camera on the back. That's really easy to see. It's harder to see the one on the front facing towards you. It's just usually a tiny little hole, but it's a camera as well. And the brilliant idea was of both of those was now I can take pictures all the time. In the old days, I could only really take pictures, when I had my camera with me, but I didn't carry my camera around all the time, especially unless I was on, traveling, in London as a tourist or something. I might have my camera, but during the week, I certainly wasn't going to walk around with, what seemed to be a 4-pound camera hanging from me. Well, now it's built into the phone, and so of course, photography's gone out of sight. And even more interesting is, of course, not only could it take pictures, it could take videos as well, moving pictures. So, you can make videos of, of your kids and of a wedding and so forth. And the camera is so good, as I said earlier on, that they're actually there are several commercial movies that have been made entirely with iPhones, right? And so that was an ingenious idea. But then you thought about, why would we need a camera facing towards me? I can understand the camera going that way, so I can take a picture of the White House or the Grand Canyon or whatever, or of my family. Why do I need one the other way? And of course, that everybody knows that created a new word in the English language, which is the selfie. And I could take photographs of myself. So with the old camera, there was essentially no way to take a photograph of yourself. And then some cameras came out with that delayed thing. You put the camera down, press the button, it would click over for 10 seconds, which would give you time to run and get into the picture with your family, and then it would go click. Now you can take a picture, including yourself, because you've got a camera that faces towards you. So that was not only did they create something, but they duplicate what was in another technology, namely the camera, but it's much, much better. And what's also interesting is if you look at, if you remember your old cameras, you could buy a cheap camera. You remember the old Kodak throwaway cameras? You bought it, you took pictures, you handed the whole camera in, and, they developed the pictures and threw away the camera. Other than those, all cameras needed a lens, right? And you could buy big, expensive telephoto lenses and so on. Your iPhone camera or your iPad camera doesn't have a big lens, and yet it takes phenomenal pictures, very, very accurate pictures, pinpoint clear. I remember in the old days, I'd take 30 pictures or whatever there was on a roll of film, and at least 10 of them I had to throw away because either they were blurred or they were duplicates, or I chopped off the top of somebody's head, the usual kind of story. Well, the iPhone now allows you to do that and see the picture at the same time before you take it. But more important is what they built in is a special chips in the phone that actually adjust the image as you take them. So if your hand trembles a little bit, with the old camera, you were going to get a blurry photograph, right? The iPhone detects that and stabilizes the image. And so your picture pretty much always comes out perfect, right? You literally have to, throw the phone around as you took a picture for it to be blurred. And we spoke about the power connector, which is at the bottom. So here's your device. Here's an iPad. There's the front camera, a very tiny little hole that you can see. The rear camera is the more obvious one on the back. And of course, the new phones are now coming out. They got 3 and 4 cameras in, right? I just got a new phone a few weeks ago, and Model X had 4 cameras and Model Y had 3. And I said, I barely use 2 cameras. So what the heck am I going to do with 4? And then I decided to go with 3 because it was a little cheaper, because I'm probably not going to use 3 cameras either. But, if you do a lot of photography and you like to take, just if you're an amateur, you like to take pictures of your family and, interesting places when we go touring again, then the iPhone is pretty great for that. And, it doesn't need lenses and so forth. There are, believe it or not, there are add-ons. You can buy a telephoto lens that clips onto your iPhone, right? So I've got one of those. It just clips on the phone and it goes over the camera lens, and it gives it a much better picture. So you can take remote pictures of distant, of animals and stuff like that. The real brilliant idea of the whole thing was none of that, right? All of that is cool stuff that I've spoken about, but not critical. The real critical idea was this screen, right? So you've probably never thought about it, but the screen on your iPhone and your iPad is a wonder of technology. And it's called basically a touch screen. And that was an idea, you know, nobody ever heard of until 2007 when Apple came out with the first Apple phone. So what is a touch screen? And that was an incredibly clever idea. First of all, it's very special glass, right? Very hard. It's called Gorilla Glass. and Apple actually got that manufactured by some company called Gorilla Glass. It's as strong as a gorilla. So you can almost punch the screen and it won't break. More important, if you drop the phone, it may crack, but mostly it won't break. And in many cases, it won't even crack. It's very, very, very strong. But more important is that under the screen, you can see there are electronic sensors. And those tiny little electronic sensors know where my finger is. They can sense the electrical activity in my finger. There's a tiny amount of electrical activity coming from your body, from the electricity generated in your nerves and so forth. And so when I bring my finger really close next to the screen, 1 foot away, my iPhone doesn't know anything about my hand. But about 1/4 of an inch away, it starts to sense that tiny electrical field, which you and I can't sense. We can't see it or hear it or anything, but it's there. It senses that, and so it knows that my finger is in the top right-hand corner or the bottom left-hand corner or somewhere in the middle. And then the next brilliant idea was to say, okay, what we will do is we will reserve specific places on the screen for all these different functions. So this one here that shows you a clock, and the second from the left in the second row, that little piece of real estate there, you know, that little, you know, 1/2 an inch by 1/2 an inch or whatever it is, 1/4 of an inch by, no, maybe 1/3 of an inch by 1/3 of an inch, so roughly 1 square inch, that's reserved for the app called clock. So if it senses my finger touching the screen right there, very briefly, you just got to touch it, kind of a light tap tap, it will say, aha, Jeff would like to see the clock. And iOS takes care of it now and says, okay, Mr. Clock application program, which is sitting somewhere in the computer, please step up to the plate. And the clock comes onto the stage, you might say, right? It's been waiting in the background, waiting in the wings. As soon as you touch it, the clock comes up and he's now in control, and he'll do for you what he's designed to do, which is to tell you the time and allow you to set alarms and all kinds of stuff. If I hit the icon in the top right-hand corner in this picture, which is the camera, then iOS says, okay, Mr. Camera, I'm putting everybody else to sleep for a moment. Everybody else on the stage, who's ever's on the stage, Mr. Clock, you are on the stage. Off you go. Mr. Camera, come forward. And Mr. Camera steps up, and suddenly now you can take photographs, right? The screen changes completely, and it's got a whole new set of functions. So that was really the ingenious idea, the really ingenious idea. And so we came up, as we said earlier, with these icons or apps. Each one is representative of one function and one function only. So again, I can see this one here, sort of the bottom row with the purple on the left side, that says, you know, it's got a music symbol. I don't have to even be able to read English to know, oh, if I press that, it's probably going to take me to a place where I can play my music, right? And, you know, that's why something that if you told me 20 years ago, I'd have thought you were crazy, is that I get phone calls. Sometimes my phone lights up. I pick up the phone and I go, blah, 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 and I say, hi, Dazzy, because it's my, you know, 2-year-old granddaughter. She can't speak yet, or she can barely speak. She can walk and she can barely speak. But she knows that tiny little finger, if she presses that button, the one, you know, that looks like a telephone, then the first number at the top of the list that comes up is me, and she can call me, and, you know, that still strikes me as amazing. Is that, you know, that is why the new generation are so computer oriented. It's only because of the clever idea of the icon. That anybody can use it. You don't need, you know, if you gave me a Chinese phone with all these words, you know, names underneath in Chinese, I probably could still operate it because I know what the clock is and I know what the camera is and so on and so forth. The most important button on the screen is this one down at the bottom, which is a physical button on most of the iPhones until now, an actual button. So in the black area around the screen, which is really a plastic support, they put a little phone, and that's the only physical button there is, right? Everything else is what we call virtual, which is the icon. Of course, Apple had to change that, and so in the latest versions too, that button is essentially gone away now, and it's now a virtual button, and you kind of got to find it. It's somewhere at the bottom of the screen there, and sometimes it's kind of tricky to find, but it's there. It just isn't a physical button anymore. Why did they do that? again, because they can. But more to the point is they realize that this black area around here, which is kind of a support, supporting the screen, that's wasted space. So now your iPhone, why it's so beautiful, the new phones, is the screen covers the entire phone, right? So although my new phone is narrower than my old phone, it has exactly the same amount of space on the screen because it's using up this black area here, this so to speak, wasted plastic, which, in the old days, or at the time that I took this screenshot, was supporting the screen. Now the screen is, the Gorilla Glass has got so strong that it supports itself. So they, just by doing that, they now get an extra, quarter of an inch at the top and quarter of an inch on the bottom. So they can now boast that it's a half an inch bigger screen, even though the actual phone hasn't changed, right? So that's really all we need to know. The important thing about this home button, I want to say, and it's well termed the home button, is if you press it, whether it's the physical home button or the virtual home button on the new devices. I still like the physical one, but my phone now has got a virtual home button on it. That takes you back to the screen. This is your home. So you can regard that button kind of like, the ruby slippers that Dorothy had in The Wizard of Oz. Do you remember what happened if she clicked the ruby slippers? Instantly, she went home back to Kansas. And that's what happens here. So the good news is, if you get lost somewhere, you're doing stuff, and after a while, you just don't know what's going on anymore. I can't get out of this. I'm stuck. All you got to do is hit the home button, and you go home to Kansas, so to speak. You come back to the screen, and then you can start again and do whatever you want. It doesn't matter what you were doing before. Instantly, it will transport you back here. So that was a very clever idea as well, because in the older days, sometimes you could really get into a complicated mess, and then the only solution was to perhaps turn the whole darn thing off and start again, which is kind of like stopping your car on the interstate, taking off the tires, rotating the tires, and then getting back and driving off. Well, none of us would want to do that in our motor car, right? Is to change the tires in the middle of the interstate because, something's gone wrong. So here you've got this very useful button. So always bear in mind that no matter what happens, no matter how complicated it appears, or you've lost yourself, you don't know where you are, you can't find your email anymore, whatever, press the home button, you're back at square one, and you essentially can start again. Very useful idea. Okay, we've spoken about the touch screen. So the idea of the touch screen also is that there was, somebody say something?
Yes, Jeff.
Yeah.
Going back to the volume button.
Yeah.
I have the iPhone XR,
Mm-hmm.
and when I'm on the home screen, when I press the volume button, I can see the volume slide up top.
Yeah. That's what
But
they
if
do. I should have mentioned that. Good point. So when you touch the volume button, they didn't do that in the earlier days. You just had to use, your thumb to make it louder or softer. Now it shows you a little icon and you can see it. So you can even change the volume just by grabbing the little icon. It's got a little line on it where the volume is, and you can drag it from left to right. Okay, that you're quite
okay, right. But my question is, when I'm in a certain app, because I have an app called SoundHound. So sometimes when I'm in a particular app, when I press that volume button, it won't show to the top, it shows on the side.
Oh, okay. Maybe
the volume slider show on the side.
Ah, that's interesting. It's probably a quirk of certain apps, but it doesn't make any difference. At the end of the day, the volume is still controlled by that physical button on the left. So whether you see the little slider or you don't, pressing it at the top makes it louder, and pressing it at the bottom makes it softer. And you can hold it down, of course, if you want to make it completely soft. I've got some apps where they make a lot of noise, right? So I don't want to hear all that noise coming back from the app. I just turn it all the way down to 0, right, for the moment that I'm kind of looking at it. Or sometimes when these irritating ads come up and I don't want to hear it, but I want to read what else is on the screen, you just change your volume down to 0. But remember to move it back up again, otherwise you won't hear it when the phone rings. But the icon or the little slider is just an extension to the button. So don't worry about whether it's on the top or on the left, or sometimes there's some apps which take total control of the screen, and if you press the volume, nothing you don't see the icon, the little slider at all. Doesn't matter. It's still making it louder or softer. You're in total control.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, kind of, sort of.
Well, that's about it. There's nothing more that I can tell you, right? The little picture, the little icon, the little slider is really an extension of what's on the side. Now, maybe one of these days, Apple's going to take away the button and make it entirely a virtual button, as we call it, on the screen. I don't know. They haven't told me their plans. Okay, so the important things to talk about, and again, most of us know this, but this is for completeness sake. So there are a number of things you can do with the screen. So the first one we've said already is tap the screen, right? Tap it, just tap it with your finger. And the interesting thing is that works for any of the icons. It also works for the virtual keyboard. So one thing you can see is your phone and your iPad don't have a keyboard, but it has a virtual keyboard. So when there's something that needs typing, like you have to type your name and address or your credit card number, whatever, a little keyboard will pop up. And that can be really frustrating. I find it, because I've got big fat fingers and it's very sensitive. So very often it'll pick up the wrong letter. You type the E and it'll pick up the W or the R because your finger, rotated slightly because it's round, it's not flat. So just a suggestion I say for tapping is, just get one of these cheap pens like this that it's got a rubber tip and you can use that. I use this all the time. It's actually one of the best things I've got because it gets it exactly right. It never rolls over to the side, right? So when you tap, don't hold it down, just tap it, right? Just a little touch and it'll go. If you hold it down, we call that the long press, then that's the instruction to iOS to say, I want to move this icon. So that was another clever idea that came up as well. It said, you're not stuck with the icons as they are. You can move them around, right? You don't have to have them in the order in which Apple gives them to you. But as you move the icon around, iOS will follow it. So it now knows that the clock isn't, like on the screen there, second from the left on the second row from the top. I've moved it down to the bottom right-hand corner. It now knows that when I touch down there in the bottom right-hand corner, what I really want to happen is I want the clock to open up, right? So what will happen is when you hold it down with Apple, something interesting occurs, right? All of the icons, I think the program has had a little fun here because on the Android, it's much simpler. You just press it and you move it. But with Apple, when you press and hold down an icon, all the icons start jiggling up and down. They're like doing a little dance. The first time you see it, you wonder if you destroyed the computer or not. They're all jiggling. And that when they're jiggling, it means you can now take any one of the icons, one or more. You can take one and then another one, and you can move them to new positions. As soon as you're done, you press the home button again, and they stop jiggling, and you've got them in the order you want. And by the way, everybody should know that there's more than one home screen. There's actually another 2 or 3 screens to the right that you can see. And the way you get them is what you do is a swipe. You put your finger on the screen and swipe to the left, kind of like turning the page in a book, and another home screen will appear with more icons on. And I think you can do it 2 or 3 more times. So there's 3 or 4 screens. There's much more real estate than just looks on your phone. You can have many apps that don't have to be on your main screen. So the apps that I use occasionally, but not every day, I put on the second screen. If I want it, let's say my banking app. I don't do banking every day anymore. I don't need much, don't need to go there very often. So I put on the second screen. If I want to go to my bank and do online banking, I just swipe to the left. This other screen opens up. There's the app. I can touch it. I can do the banking and then swipe to the right, go back to the first one. And you can do that 2 or 3 times. That means you've got plenty space, right? So that's the swipe. On the phone as well, and on the tablet, if you swipe from the top down, go right near the top and you swipe down, basically very often you should try it out. You'll see some instructions, so you can do some other stuff where you're actually talking to the operating system. You can see you can see more clearly how much battery you've got left, what network you're connected to, and all kinds of stuff like that. Don't do it very often, but it's there. So then moving that icon around, they call it a drag. So you just drag you take the icon, you hold it with your finger while it's jiggling up and down, and you just drag it to its new position. And you don't have to worry about the other icons. If you drag it between two icons, it'll move the other ones to the right or to the left to accommodate the one that you're bringing in. It's very clever. You won't lose anything. Right? Then we also have two that are very clever called the pinch and the spread. And exactly as the name suggests, now you use two fingers. And if you do a spread, let's start with the spread. If you put your fingers on the screen, your thumb and your forefinger, and you open them up, like spreading your two fingers out, the screen will get bigger. It will enlarge the screen. And obviously the pinch, which is exactly the opposite, starting with your fingers, say 2 inches apart and bringing them together so your thumb and your first finger touch, that's making it smaller. So that's very useful for reading some screens, right? If you just can't read what's on CNN.com or at Amazon.com or whatever, you can actually make it bigger or make it smaller, which is fantastic, you know, especially if your eyes are not as good as they used to be, like mine. Okay, let's talk about just one or two more things and then we'll break. And again, I'm happy to take questions. I'll stay online. Security. So one thing about Apple is they're very strong on security. They have been probably the best on that of anybody. And so when you start your phone up or your device up for the first time, it comes up with this number pad, right? Which is the famous number pad we see. And we have to type in a 4-digit PIN, for example, 6498, 1234, whatever. I would not suggest that you ever use a PIN like 1234 or 4567 because it's too easy for somebody to guess. And the reason for this PIN is, of course, that, you know, if you leave your phone somewhere, essentially nobody's really going to steal it because they can't get into it, right? It's basically a useless device. If they don't know the PIN, they can't get into it. And Apple, of course, realizes 4 digits has only got 1,000 possibility or 9,999 possibilities. So I could try them all, starting at 0001 and all the way up. But Apple's anticipated that, and they'll only give you, I think it's 5 or 10 tries. Certainly at 10, if you get 10 times you put in the PIN and it's wrong, it locks the phone out, right? And then you have to wait 24 hours before it will unlock. And if you do it again, then it sort of locks out permanently. You've got to get Apple to help you to open the thing. So, you know, if I steal your iPhone, it ain't going to be much use to me other than as a paperweight, right? Unless I reset the thing, you know, figure out how to reset it back to the factory setting. You can, so when you get the phone the first time, it will allow you to put in a 4-digit code. And then in a future session, I'm going to show you how you can change the PIN if you so desire. You know, if you get a phone from your son or your daughter, they give you their phone, and you want to use your PIN, not the one that was there before, you can actually change it. I'll show you how we can do that. But again, notice the warning at the bottom, don't forget the PIN. If you haven't got your PIN, if you can't remember it, even Apple can get it. It's so secure that even Apple can't get it. So bear that in mind. You know, it should be a number that's easy for you to remember. But don't do, you know, the obvious 1234 or 2468 or some obvious. It should be a truly random number that you can easily remember. Don't make it the same as your phone number, right? That's also too easy. I once helped one of the students to get into his phone where he'd forgotten the number, and I tried the last 4 digits of his phone number, and sure enough, that worked. That's not a good idea because, as you see, I could guess it fairly easily, right? So don't use the 4 digits of your address. Don't use the 4 digits of your phone number. Don't use 4 digits from your birthday. You know, those are too easy to know. Come up with 4 random digits. Just, you know, it can be the same 4 digits you use for your banking, for example, for your ATM card. That's fine, right? As long as that's a good number, not 2468 or something like that. Okay, so let's talk about one last thing and then we'll break. So there are many icons on the phone, as you know, but there's only one icon that talks to the operating system. And that's this one in the top. You can see it in the top right-hand corner. It kind of looks like a weird gear wheel, right? And they call it the settings button. I think that's a really stupid name. I don't even know what settings actually means. What's setting, right? What it means is you're talking to iOS. So when you press the camera icon, you're talking to the camera, and you can take pictures or take videos or whatever. When you click on the email icon, you can read your emails and send emails. But when you click on this icon, what does settings mean? It doesn't mean anything. It actually means they should call it the iOS button. So this is the only time you ever talk to the operating system. And generally, we don't do it very often, right? We don't do it very often. But when we do, then there are important settings that you can change. And then in that context, the settings mean this is how the phone operates, right? So what happens on your phone, well, this is on an iPad. So you'll see a whole lot of settings down the left. And then for each setting, so the one that's highlighted in blue here, on the right, more information will pop up. A phone is too small to do this. So on your phone, you will just see the settings. And when you choose one, the screen will change and you will see the stuff that's on the right. But on your iPad, which has a bigger screen, you can see both of them at the same time. So I'm just going to talk about one or two of them and then we will break. So the top one is airplane mode. And you've got here a little slider switch that Apple loves this idea. So you see the little circle next to the word off. If you put your finger on it, it's like a switch and you drag it to the right, it will change color. And here you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a switch that's on. It changes color. It's now blue. The switch is to the little circle switches to the right. And now that is activated. So here my airplane mode at the top left is off. In the old days, you know, they said you went into airplane mode because your phone could affect the electronics of the plane. That was all baloney. It never made any sense. I never believed in it. Nobody uses it anymore. So you don't really need that at all. But if you wanted to turn it on to airplane mode, which means you can still play games and stuff on your phone, but you can't have phone calls, you can just drag this to the right and then drag it to the left. It's not needed anymore. Only two more I'll talk about and then we're done. So the next one is Wi-Fi and the one after that is Bluetooth, which are kind of variations of the same theme. So this Wi-Fi, when you click on it, will allow you to turn access to the internet on or off. Wi-Fi really means my access to the internet. And of course, you need a Wi-Fi signal at your house or at the airport, wherever you are, or you go to, because in the old days, we'd go to a Starbucks, you got free Wi-Fi, and all you have to do is tell your phone to connect to that particular Wi-Fi. So if I'm in the Starbucks, the Wi-Fi is called Starbucks Roswell Road or something. I would see when I click on Wi-Fi on the right, I would see all the available networks, one of which might be Starbucks Roswell Road or my own home email, whatever it's called, my own home Wi-Fi that I pay for. And you just click on that on the right-hand side here and automatically it will connect to that Wi-Fi. Most Wi-Fi's today are not like Starbucks, which is free and therefore has no password. Most Wi-Fi's need a password. You would probably have a password on your home Wi-Fi. We have one on the Benson Wi-Fi when we used to be physically in the building, and that prevents, outsiders from, freebieing onto your Wi-Fi. I pay for my Wi-Fi. I don't want my, cheapskate neighbor next door to be using my Wi-Fi for free, right? If I choose to let somebody use my Wi-Fi, then that's fine. So if you come to my house, I will tell you what the Wi-Fi name is, and I will give you the password. And then once you've clicked into a Wi-Fi and you've connected to the internet, this clever iOS will remember that forever. So if you come to my house, I give you the password, you connect to my Wi-Fi, you get your emails and do whatever you want, then you go away and you come back in 6 months' time, it will instantly say, I remember this Wi-Fi. And unless I've changed the password, it will remember the password, log you in, and everything will work fine. So very useful. Bluetooth, which you can see here says is on. Bluetooth is a kind of a short range Wi-Fi. Short range meaning it only operates over distances of about a couple of feet. So the classic one today is in your car. Most cars today have Bluetooth built in. And as soon as I get into my car, my phone connects to the Bluetooth in the car. So there's a Bluetooth connection somewhere in the dashboard. I can't see it, but it's only a couple of feet away. So while I'm standing at the trunk, it doesn't connect. It's too far away. But as soon as I open the door and sit in the front seat, my phone says, I know that Bluetooth. It's called, Jeff's car or whatever. It connects, and now you can make phone calls through the through the radio on the car, which is a much better sound system, and other things that can happen. Those earpods that Apple have, those little white things that hang out of your ear, that's exactly the same. It's connected via Bluetooth. And Bluetooth as well will have a passcode, a PIN. So, you know, if I've got my earpods on and I walk past you, it won't, you know, my earpods may try to connect to your phone, but they won't be able to do it because it doesn't know the PIN number for your phone, but it knows the PIN number for my phone. So when I have my phone in my pocket, or you have your phone in your bag, it still will see it, connect to it, and you can make calls using the earpods or listen to music without having to you know, connect anything, any wires or anything like that. So those are the most commonly used ones. Wi-Fi you will use every time you go to some new place. You come to my house, or you go to Benson for the first time. When Benson reopens, please God, soon, you'll need the password there, but you only need it one time. Of course, if Benson chooses to change the password when we reopen, then all of us will have to re-enter the password one time. But those are the most common two. And then next time I'm going to talk about sounds and privacy. You'll see those down below the blue line, sounds and privacy. We'll talk about that. Most of the rest you never use. And I'm not going to bother even discussing them because notifications I want to talk about as well, the one just above the blue, you know, which is where you can reset your phone so that it works the way you want. You can change its behavior slightly. So notifications, for example, prevents applications from binging you all the time. Some apps like to keep binging you. Every time a message comes in, it bings and it can drive you nuts. You can turn those notifications on or off as you wish, selectively by application. We'll talk about that next time. Okay, so we've gone on a little longer than I thought, but we're pretty much done. Next week, I will, you know, summarize everything we've done today. So anybody, you know, has questions, I'll go over it again next week. I do that every week. We'll summarize what we did before. You have my email address there, and on that second slide, please send me an email, and I will send you these slides so that you've got them for your own use. And you can certainly ask questions now, or you can send me an email to ask questions at any time about your phone. I'll stay on the line for a little bit if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, we're done. Have a great day. Have a good weekend, and stay healthy.
Thank you. See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Enjoy the weekend.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Enjoy your week.
All right. Bye, everyone.